I turned 61 on a warm Saturday in April, and for the first time in years, I let myself feel proud. The backyard was glowing with string lights. There were tables dressed in soft blue linens, platters of roasted vegetables and lemon chicken, glasses clinking with sparkling cider, because I never quite liked champagne. My daughter Sophie flew in from Boston, and my son Jonah brought his little boy, who toddled across the grass like he was discovering a whole new planet. The celebration was twofold. My birthday, yes, but also my official retirement after nearly 4 decades as an interior designer. Clients had become friends, my calendar had ruled my life for years, and now I was ready for quiet mornings and unhurried coffee. I wore the silk dress Robert had given me 3 birthdays ago, the one I kept in the back of the closet for something special. He said I looked radiant. I believed him. We danced to Van Morrison. We laughed. There was cake, and then came the moment I'd been waiting for. Robert clinking his glass for attention. He smiled at me, the kind of soft, admiring smile that still made my heart stutter after 40 years. "If I could just say something," he began, "about this woman right here." He spoke about my strength during my battle with breast cancer, about how I'd held our family together with more grace than anyone he'd ever known. I felt my eyes sting with tears, but they were the good kind. Then his voice changed, just slightly. "And there's something else I want to share," he said, shifting his weight. "Something I should have said a long time ago." My stomach tightened, but I smiled through it. I thought maybe it was a love letter, or a surprise trip. He'd been acting strangely all week. I assumed it was nerves, but then I saw it. The flicker. That look people get when they're about to drop something that doesn't belong in a celebration. The quiet panic under their voice. The kind that says, "I don't want to hurt you, but I'm about to anyway." He inhaled, looked directly at me, and said, "I found out 6 months ago that I have a son. His name is Michael. He's 20. I had no idea until recently, but he exists, and I've spoken to him." The words didn't register at first. "A son?" Someone laughed, thinking it was a bad joke. But Robert didn't laugh. He went on, explaining how it happened. "A mistake," he said. "A single night during a trip out of town. 20 years ago. Right around the time I was going through chemo, he said he never knew the woman had been pregnant, that she reached out just before Christmas last year, and that he felt it was time I knew." Time I knew. He said it like it was an anniversary card, like the timing was noble. I stood there in my pretty dress, my guests frozen, my daughter gripping the back of her chair, and I couldn't feel my feet. Everything went quiet. The world didn't fall apart with an explosion, it just evaporated. 1 sentence at a time. I nodded. I didn't cry. Not yet. I just walked inside, past the string lights, past the music, past my own life, and I closed the door behind me before anyone could follow. I didn't sleep that night. I lay in bed, fully dressed, with the sound of distant laughter still echoing in my ears long after the party had ended. I heard the front door open and close as guests trickled out, hushed voices murmuring goodbyes they didn't know how to say. Robert didn't come upstairs right away. I imagined him lingering in the kitchen, maybe washing a plate, maybe pretending that what he'd done was brave. But I wasn't ready to speak to him. I wasn't sure I ever would be. I kept hearing it, on repeat. His name is Michael. He's 20. The math alone was its own kind of betrayal. 20 years ago, I was counting my days in treatment cycles, measuring life in blood counts and hair loss. 20 years ago, I was terrified I wouldn't get to see my children grow up. And he was out there, sleeping with someone else. Not in a moment of grief, not after a fight, not when our marriage was falling apart, but while I was fighting for my life. At 6 a.m., I finally moved. I changed out of my dress, washed my face, and walked downstairs. Robert was asleep on the couch, one arm over his eyes, the other holding a throw pillow like a life preserver. I didn't wake him. Instead, I drove. No destination, just roads and silence and the steady hum of the car engine to drown out the ringing in my head. I ended up parked in front of Linda's house, my oldest friend, my closest confidant. We'd known each other since college. She opened the door before I even knocked. "Come in," she said. No questions, just warmth. I sat at her kitchen table, fingers wrapped tightly around a mug of tea. I couldn't bring myself to sip. She sat across from me, waiting. "He told me, at the party," I finally said, in front of everyone. Her eyes widened. "Wait, Told you what? That he has a son, 20 years old, from someone else. She didn't speak for a full 10 seconds, just stared, hand over her mouth. Then she whispered, "Oh, Eleanor." I shook my head. I didn't even cry, isn't that strange? "No," she said. "That's shock." I sat there in silence while the sun rose higher. Outside, birds chirped like the world hadn't just tilted sideways. Linda finally spoke again. "What are you going to do?" I didn't know. I wanted to scream, or curl up in a ball and sleep for a year, or vanish into someone else's life for a while. Instead, I said, "I need to know who this boy is." Linda blinked. "Michael?" I nodded. If I'm going to hate someone, I at least want to know who I'm hating. But even as I said it, I knew hate wasn't the right word. It wasn't his fault. He hadn't asked to be born into secrecy. Hadn't asked to become the earthquake that cracked my life in two. It was Robert. And it was me. For trusting a version of him that didn't exist. When I got home, Robert was sitting at the kitchen table, eyes bloodshot, a mug of coffee untouched in front of him. He looked up, tentative. "I didn't know how else to say it," he began. I held up my hand. "Not now. I'm not ready for your explanations," he nodded. "I want his number," I said. Robert blinked. "Michael's?" "Yes, I want to speak to him. Alone." He hesitated, then pulled a piece of paper from his wallet and slid it across the table. I didn't thank him. I didn't need to. I went upstairs, sat on the edge of the bed, stared at my phone. Then I texted. "Hi, this is Eleanor. I'm Robert's wife. I'd like to meet you." Just to talk. Seconds passed, then a minute, then a reply. "Hi, I'd like that." Sure. And just like that, the next chapter of this mess began. Not with forgiveness, not with rage, but with a single, cautious conversation I didn't know how to have, but knew I had to. We met at a small cafe on the edge of town, one of those quiet places with mismatched chairs and overgrown ivy creeping up the windows. I chose it on purpose, neutral, quiet, anonymous. I got there early, too early. I spent 10 minutes stirring cream into a coffee I wasn't drinking, watching the door like I was waiting for a ghost. Then he walked in. Michael. He was tall, thin, with sandy brown hair that curled slightly at the ends. He didn't look like Robert. Not at first glance, but there was something familiar about the way he scanned the room. Cautious, polite, eyes full of questions he didn't want to ask out loud. I stood slowly. He gave a small smile. "Mrs. Galloway?" he asked. "Eleanor," I said. We sat across from each other, both of us unsure how to start. He cleared his throat. "Thank you for reaching out. I didn't expect that." "I didn't expect you," I said honestly. He nodded. "That makes two of us." There was a pause. I noticed his hands trembling slightly, not from fear exactly, more like someone trying hard to be careful in someone else's house. "I don't want anything," he said suddenly. "I know how this looks, but I didn't come here to ruin anything." "You didn't," I replied. "You didn't do anything wrong." He looked down. "She didn't tell me until last year, my mom. I always thought her boyfriend was my dad. Then one night she told me the truth, that it was someone she met during a legal conference, said he didn't know, said she never told him." I didn't respond. I just let him speak. I tracked him down online, just out of curiosity. I wasn't sure I'd even reach out, but I did, and to his credit, he responded. "To his credit?" I echoed softly. Michael looked up at me then. "I didn't know he was married." I blinked. "He's always been married." His face fell. I felt a sting in my chest, seeing his expression. He wasn't the enemy. He was a casualty just like me. "I'm sorry," he whispered. "You don't have to be," I said. "I think we're both standing in the fallout of something we didn't create." Another long silence stretched between us, but it wasn't uncomfortable, just tender, fragile. I asked him about his life. He told me he was studying architecture, that he loved old buildings, that he played piano, self-taught, that he always wondered if his curiosity and need to fix broken things came from a father he'd never met. "And now that you've met him?" I asked. Michael shrugged. "I don't really know what to feel. He seems decent, but also distant. Like he's still figuring out how to look me in the eye." "He is," I said quietly. "I don't want him to feel like he has to make up for anything." Michael said, "But I do want to know where I came from. I think everyone deserves that." He reached into his coat pocket and pulled out something, a photo, a Polaroid. A picture of him as a toddler, standing next to a tiny piano with one missing key. "She took this the week after I turned 3, he said. "She said I played the same 3 notes over and over until she begged me to stop." I looked at it. I don't know why, but I smiled. He was never supposed to be a father to me. Michael said, I get that. But now that I know who he is, I just want the truth to mean something. Not everything, just something. That was the moment I realized he wasn't here to take anything from me. He was here to gather what pieces he could of himself. We left the cafe together. At the door, he hesitated. Thank you for not yelling, he said with a half laugh. I'm saving that for your father, I said dryly. He laughed a little more freely then. Do you want to meet again? He asked cautiously. I nodded. Yes, I think I do. He smiled, real this time. And then he was gone. I stood there for a moment, arms crossed against the breeze, the air full of spring, and something else I couldn't quite name. I had come expecting resentment, or distance, or the ache of what should have been. Instead, I found a young man searching for meaning, and in a strange, aching way, I felt seen, not as the woman who'd been lied to, but as the one who could still choose what came next. I didn't tell Robert about the meeting right away, not because I wanted to keep it from him, but because I needed space to let it breathe, to understand what I felt, beyond the obvious betrayal, beyond the heaviness that still sat in my chest like wet concrete. But the truth was, something had shifted. Michael wasn't a threat. He wasn't a scandal. He was a person, a gentle, thoughtful, intelligent young man who walked into my life with more grace than the man who should have prepared me for it ever had. It took me a few days to process. I went on long walks by the river. I journaled. I sat in the room I'd once designed as my creative retreat, but hadn't used in years, and for the first time since my retirement, I let myself paint again. It wasn't until Thursday evening that I told Robert we needed to talk. He looked startled. Okay, he said, slowly setting down his book. I met Michael. He blinked. You, what? I texted him. I met him at a cafe. His mouth opened slightly, but he didn't say anything. I needed to see him, I continued. Not for you, for me. He nodded cautiously. How was it? Beautiful, I said honestly. Painful. Real. More honest than anything we've shared in weeks. Robert looked ashamed. I sat across from him at the table, the same table where we'd eaten dinner for 35 years. The wood still bore the mark of that candle wax stain from Christmas 2002. The corner where Sophie carved a smiley face when she was 10. It was a table built on memories. But tonight, it felt like a negotiation. You shattered something in me, Robert. He looked up. I know. You didn't just betray our vows. You rewrote our history without telling me. You let me live a version of life that wasn't entirely real. I was afraid, he said, voice cracking. You were so sick back then. I didn't know if you'd survive, and when I found out about Michael, I told myself it was nothing, that I could bury it, that it wouldn't come back. But it did, I whispered. He nodded slowly. I'm not here to rage at you, I said. I've done enough of that in my own head, but I need boundaries. Anything, he said quickly. I want space. I want time to figure out what forgiveness means to me now. I'm not going to file for divorce, Robert, but I'm also not going to pretend everything's fine. He swallowed hard. What does that mean, exactly? It means for the next 3 months, I want you to stop contacting Michael. He looked stunned, but I held up a hand. Not forever. I just need that time, for me, for Michael, for this house to breathe. He was silent. Then, okay, I understand. We sat there in the quiet, the refrigerator humming softly in the background. I loved you, I said. He looked at me, wounded. Loved? I don't know if I still do. I want to, but I don't know. That broke something in him. I saw it. Not dramatic, not performative, just a slow, painful collapse behind his eyes. The recognition that consequences had finally caught up to him, not out of vengeance, but truth. That night, I moved into the guest room. It was colder there, quieter, but it was mine. And in that quiet, I wrote letters, to Sophie, to Jonah, and eventually to Michael. I told them all the truth. My version of it. Not to punish, not to manipulate, but to reclaim my voice in a story that had for a time been ripped from my hands. Michael replied to my letter with care. Thank you for seeing me, he wrote. Thank you for letting me exist. It was a strange kind of grief, mourning the life I thought I had, while beginning to glimpse something new on the horizon. Something not quite healed, but alive. And maybe, just maybe, that was enough to begin again. 3 months passed, quietly, steadily, like the tide returning after a storm. I spent the summer waking early, reading books I'd once shelved for later, and tending to my garden with a kind of reverence I didn't know I had. I filled the guest room with soft yellow light and began sleeping deeply for the first time in years. I saw friends. I went to a ceramics class. I laughed without forcing it. Robert kept his distance, not coldly but respectfully. He slept in the master bedroom. He didn't ask questions, didn't try to explain, and somehow that silence became its own kind of apology. Then, one evening in August, I invited him to dinner. Not as a wife resuming routine, but as a woman ready to have a new kind of conversation. He arrived at the table freshly shaved, wearing the navy sweater I once loved on him. He looked older than I remembered, and softer. "I made lasagna," I said. He smiled. "I haven't had that in months." "I know." We ate slowly, the air filled with cautious warmth. When the plates were cleared, I handed him a letter. He hesitated. "What is this?" "My terms," I said gently. "If we're going to continue, if there's going to be any version of us going forward." He opened it. Inside were 3 things. He would attend therapy, alone, for 6 months, not to win me back, but to understand himself, his choices, and the parts of him he kept hidden even from himself. He would reintroduce himself to Michael, not as a fixer, but as a flawed man seeking connection, and only if Michael wanted it. We would rebuild our marriage from the ground up, not resume, not pretend, but redefine, on new terms, with new honesty. He read silently, then looked up at me with tears in his eyes. "Eleanor, I don't deserve this." "No," I said, "you don't, but that's not the point." "What is the point?" "That I do." He nodded, slowly, reverently, and whispered, "Yes." The next week, I hosted a small dinner at home. Sophie was hesitant, Jonah guarded, but they came. And Michael, he came too. He brought a bottle of sparkling grape juice and a small bouquet of sunflowers. "Your email said you liked them," he said shyly. "I did," I replied. "I do." The evening wasn't perfect. There were long pauses, awkward glances, and moments when Jonah excused himself for fresh air. But there was laughter too. Real, unexpected. And even a moment when Sophie asked Michael about his favorite architects and nodded with reluctant approval at his answers. After everyone left, I stood in the doorway with Robert, watching the taillights disappear into the night. "You think they'll come around?" he asked. "I think they already have, a little." He reached for my hand but stopped halfway. I closed the distance, fingers brushing, then settling. And in that small, deliberate gesture, I felt something shift again. Not back to what we were, but toward something new. Not innocence, not forgetfulness, but peace. Months later, I was asked to speak at a local women's group about starting over after 60. I almost said no. But then I thought of Michael, of Robert, of the version of me who walked out of her own birthday party and didn't know what to do next. So I stood up in a room full of women with lined faces and wise hearts, and I told them the truth. That sometimes the most radical act of self-love isn't leaving, it's staying, with new rules, new voice, new clarity. And that forgiving someone doesn't mean erasing what they did. It means refusing to let it define you. As I spoke, I saw heads nodding, a few tears, a knowing smile or two. When it ended, a woman approached me and said, "I thought it was too late to change. You reminded me it's not." I went home that night, poured a glass of tea, and sat under the stars beside Robert. We didn't talk much. We didn't need to. Because sometimes love isn't loud. It's the quiet decision to try again. And again, with open eyes, open hands, and a heart that, somehow, still has room. This story reminds us that betrayal can happen at any age, but so can strength, dignity, and starting over on your own terms. Eleanor didn't let her husband's secret destroy her. She paused, reflected, and chose a new kind of power: truth, boundaries, and healing. If this story moved you, we'd love to hear what you think. Comment 2 if you liked it, or 7 if it wasn't for you. And if you believe more people need to hear real, raw stories like this, please hit like and subscribe to EN Reddit Story for more emotional, true tales every week.